everybody, welcome back to Firebase Semi-live, where we've been sort of going through the process of creating a favorites page for our sample restaurant review app. So as you recall, last time we created within our Friendly Eats page this lovely little Get My Favorites or View My Favorites button that right now prints out something to the console, and that's about it. But then we've also gone ahead and created this cloud function that we're able to run locally using the Firebase emulator suite, which now means that I can now just sort of run this locally. And changing this is really easy. I just have to do an npm run build, like you can see here. And then it goes ahead and reserves that function locally. Hopefully you're at that point too. Just remember, if you sort of stopped everything from last time and you're coming back into your project for this video, make sure that you once again are running Firebase emulators :start within your project directory so that these emulators and everything is running locally. All right, so let's start building our fetch our users' favorite restaurants function. And I think it's maybe good just to sort of take a moment to think about what would our API actually look like? And for sort of these cloud functions that we're going to call from within our app, I kind of like to think what would it look like as a REST call? So one option would be my project, and it might look like v0, because we like to add version numbers into our REST calls, get favorites. And, this would be our user ID. That looks pretty good. And another alternate might be my project v0, get restaurants from list. And here we, would pass in a list of restaurants, whatever, ID2, ID3, whatever that would look like. But I like this first version better, basically because it gives us the option to sort of view favorites of other users, right? We might be able to, again, hey, I got a friend or somebody who I think has the same taste in restaurants as me. I want to see what their favorite restaurants are. This seems like a much more useful API call to make, rather than this, where suddenly now I have to be able to query this user's list of favorite restaurants by grabbing their user document. And I got to make sure I do that in a secure way that doesn't expose data from that document I'm not supposed to see, and blah, blah, blah. I think sort of if this were a REST call, this is probably what it would look like, is, under my project, v0, get favorites ID. And so that's kind of what we're going to do here. So I'm going to create a new function called export const, and we'll call it get favorites _v0. I kind of like putting version numbers in here. You don't have to, but it does mean that later on, if we were to change this, you could basically just sort of, in a non-backwards compatible way, you could create a function that's v1 and have your new clients call that without worrying that if you got an old client out there in the world, it's going to break because you sort of changed this in a non-backwards compatible way. But you do you. I'm not here to judge. And so again, this will be sort of functions, HTTPS, on request. Whoop, not on request. And this, again, sort of these on request calls basically pass in sort of two objects, right? You've got your request, which might contain URL arguments that are being passed in, as well as the response, which is going to be sort of the object you're going to write to in order to basically sort of create your HTTP response. That's the overly simplified version of what these HTTPS on request functions look like. So let's see here. So we'll get our user ID, and we'll get that from our request.query.uid. And this will basically say, grab if the UID argument from sort of our URL. And we'll say, all right, well, if this exists, there we go. We'll do a response.send, and we'll do a little string interpolation. I am going to get favorites for user and then user ID. Sorry, just because I think I've sort of said ID as lowercase d everywhere else, just for consistency, let's go ahead and, can I refactor? Can I rename symbol? Sorry. Rename symbol, user ID. Okay, that will make me feel better. Yeah, so basically, you'll notice that I was able to get the UID argument from request, and then this response.send is basically what sort of tells our function, okay, go ahead and spit back a valid HTML page, with the code 400, and this is going to be sort of the text of the response. Let's go ahead and call npm run build so that maybe we can call this function. So you'll notice, by the way, in my log for the emulator, it's now said, hey, look, there's this new function that's been initialized, get favorites v0. And if I were to open that up, let's see what happens. I'm getting an error. Or most likely, actually, I'm sort of reaching the end of this without anything happening because I didn't supply a user ID. So let's do two things here. Let's do response.send no user ID. What's up with that? And then maybe more importantly, let's go ahead and call this again with the user ID. Equals ABCDEFG. All right, so there we go. That's better. I'm going to get favorites for user ABCDEFG. And I will also call npm run build just to make sure that this new version is compiled. So yay, this works. And calling without a user ID. Oh, that's interesting. Cannot set headers after they are sent to the client. And it crashed. It like really crashed. Wow, that's bad. All right, so here's why that's happening. Ha! Okay. With your onRequest function, basically, you can only sort of have one response.send, right? Because we basically at this point have said, OK, go ahead and package up this sort of response that is our appropriate web page and send it off to our client. And we've gone ahead and called that twice. I don't know, maybe the best thing here is add a return or maybe add an else or something. Let's add a return. And now, hopefully, I won't break my functions. But actually, this has crashed the emulator pretty hard. And so I probably, if I actually just call emulator start, is this going to give me an error? Yeah, because it looks like Firestore is still running. So let's do a ps grep Firestore. There it is. Let's kill 8029, and then let's run it again. All right, a little better. You know, it might be that by the time you see this, it won't crash so badly when it encounters these sorts of errors. But if you do, this is probably what you have to do to restart it. So let's click on that. Got favorites. Hey, no user ID, and user ID equals ABC. And that works too. All right. Whew. Boy, that was it's an awful lot of work for just printing out the user ID, wasn't it? But it's OK. We now have a function that's up and running. I guess maybe first, let's make sure that we can talk to the database properly from our getFavorites function. All right. We'll get a snapshot here equals await admin dot Firestore, and we'll go from our collection of restaurants. Limit 1 get. And this is basically saying, hey, why don't you go ahead, get that first document in our restaurants collection. This await is basically a JavaScripty way of saying, hey, I know you're an asynchronous function. I'm just going to kind of wait till this is done before getting to the next line. So, you know, again, from other languages, you might be used to like doing this and then like having a completion handler and doing something else in the completion handler and so on and so forth. This basically is just sort of a clever way of saying, don't do anything until this, you know, this call is done, and then we'll sort of move on to the next line. Let's see, snapshot. So this is basically going to be a collection of documents. You can kind of see it's a query snapshot. And basically, because even though I'm only calling, you know, get on one document, this thing that it gets, I believe, is still sort of a collection of documents. So we're going to call for each on it. And we'll say, OK, that's a, for each, we'll call it a document snapshot. And within there, let's just like console log docsnap.data. It's also giving me this problem or this error where it's saying, hey, you're saying await in here, but then now that must means this whole function needs to be labeled as asynchronous. And I'll say, OK, well, then just do that. So now this function is now being labeled as asynchronous, which now means I can use async await inside of it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, again, Doug has a really good video series on like sort of asynchronous and async await within Cloud Functions. I recommend you check that out. let's build and run this and see what happens. I'm going to shrink this window just a little bit so that maybe you can see the bottom a little better. All right, so let's jump over here and call npm run build. Is this going to work? Seems to be working. Let's go ahead and run this function and see what we get. This loaded, and over in my console, I'm getting an error. Oh, it's saying default Firebase app does not exist. Make sure you call initialize app before using any of the Firebase services. Well, OK, we can do that. So I'll go back in here, and let's just make this a top level thing. We'll say const app equals admin.initialize app. And then actually, I think what we can also do is let's just have const firestore equal app.firestore. And so basically what we're doing here is this is saying, I guess I was hoping I'd be able to get away with just sort of like calling the default Firestore instance. But really what it's saying is, hey, you got to make sure you properly initialize your app. And what this is going to do is sort of, it's going to look at its environment, and it is going to figure out what project it should be talking to, what database it should be talking to, all that kind of stuff. And then Firestore is going to be sort of the Firestore instance based on that app. And so I will just, instead of calling admin.firestore here, I'll just call Firestore, and then we can get our collection. And so now, let's try that. Once again, it looks like I'm probably going to need to ps grep Firestore, because I bet you that's still running, and kill it. And we'll call our emulator start again. Good, that's working. Let's call npm run build, make sure this is all compiling OK. And let's, go back here, and let's run this again. And I think everything should work. So it's saying it's going to get favorites for that user, but most important is what is happening in the console. And it looks like it hasn't printed out anything. So why is that? Here's the reason why. Is when we are loading up, I think what's happening, and we'll confirm this in a little bit, is I'm loading up this Cloud function, and it's running locally. And because I'm running it within the emulator environment, it also knows it should be talking to Cloud Firestore. And that's also happening locally. But this app that's still being served, this is still talking to Cloud Firestore in the cloud. It doesn't know that it should be talking to the version of Cloud Firestore that is sort of running locally. Luckily, we can fix this pretty easily. And this is some very common code that you will probably see. Where should I put this? Let's put this at the top of our friendly eats. Some sort of initialization here. Let's put it at the top. We'll say if window.location. I can't type today. There we go. Not local storage. .hostname equals localhost. Then let's log out. Let's log to the console. Localhost detected. And then more importantly, we'll say Firebase.firestore.settings will include this object of host equal to localhost 8080 and SSL set to false. All right, so by adding this in, I am now telling our local version of Friendly Eats to go ahead and talk to the local version of Cloud Firestore, which then means hopefully when we load it up again, we can populate our local version with some data. So let's go back in here and run this. And well, we see that our local host is detected, but we also see that we've got like this other weird error, and it still seems to be talking to our database in the cloud. So what's going on here? What's going on here is basically we've confused our local persistence. as you recall, like we've been playing with data that we've loaded up through Cloud Firestore. Our sort of SDK knows that it's made these queries to get these restaurants. And so it's very confused that it's suddenly making the exact same queries as before, but now Cloud Firestore is basically like, I don't know what you're talking about. What restaurants? There's no such thing as this restaurants collection. And it's like, what's going on? I'm confused. I must not be able to talk to Cloud Firestore. And so I'll just kind of show all this locally cached data I have instead. And so our client is getting confused because sort of it doesn't quite realize, or it hasn't quite figured out that we've switched the database out from under it. That was unexpected. And that combined with the data that it thinks it already has through its persistence layer is just getting it very confused. So we can actually fix this very easily by just not enabling persistence. Easiest way, I think, is let's comment this out, because eventually we'll probably want to keep persistence enabled. But we can say, I think if we do promise.resolve, we can kind of keep the rest of this function running. So promise.resolve, which means sort of resolve immediately, and then go on and sign in anonymously, then update our user info, and so on and so forth. So now we'll save that. We will load up our local version. It still says localhost detected because it is now talking to our local version of Cloud Firestore, but now it just knows that there's no data, which is the correct thing. So I'll say, all right, let's add some fake data. And now it looks like we have our fake restaurants. And yeah, we've populated our local database with some fake restaurants, and we should be good to go. So let's see here. Let's go back and reload this function. It still says it's going to get you favorites for that user. But now if we jump over to the console, hey, look at that. There's an object.object, which I'm going to assume represents our restaurant from the local database. So now we have our emulator talking to our local restaurant. Kind of annoying that it's being represented as object-object. Let's do some real quick debugging here to fix that up. I'm going to go back into my TypeScript here, and let's import this great little library called util. So import, man, I can't type today. Actually, I just can't type normally, but you don't know it. I edit out all my typos. All right, so I've imported this thing, and now I can call this very handy function called util.inspect, which basically, if you pass it in an object, it will go ahead and sort of give you a little more detail about what's actually in the object. It won't just be like, oh, look, it's this object called object, which is kind of annoying. So let's see. Let's try that one more time. npm run build. Reload this. Jump back into my console. And hey, look at that. Great. It's now telling me a little bit about this first restaurant that I was able to find in our database. It's called Eaton Place, a Mexican restaurant in Tucson. And let's just make sure that seems to match up with what we've got running locally. Eaton Place, Mexican restaurant, Tucson, $3 signs, $3 signs. All right. It looks like now we have our cloud function as well as our local version of our cloud function as well as our local version of our app, both talking to the local instance of Cloud Firestore. That's good. One note, by the way, actually maybe a couple notes. First is that if you were to quit your emulator and start up again, your local version of Cloud Firestore will be erased. It'll be wiped out again from the beginning. So you kind of have to watch out for that. If it crashes, something like that, you have to restart it. You're going to end up empty again, which means you're going to have to create new restaurants again, which also means that sort of this hard-coded list of restaurants that we've got in our friendlyeats.data, this is wrong. This is now sort of referring to restaurant IDs that do not exist. So we kind of need to make sure that we grab the right ones and put those in every time, as well as maybe even our user ID. So let's find out. So let's see. So we've gotten everything talking to our local version of the database. Let's go ahead and under this, let's, instead of printing out our current user, which is sort of a not interesting object, let's print out our user ID so we know what function to call within our cloud function. So I'm going to go ahead and reload this. So this is going to be our user ID that we're going to use from now on. Let's also replace those two fake restaurants in our favorite array with some real IDs. Let's go with, Oh man, there's none of the macarons. All right, let's go with our drive-through places. Drive-through prime, we'll copy this ID, put it here. And place drive-through, copy that, put that in. Save that. We'll run this again. And now these two have been saved in our favorites array. Unfortunately, when you're running locally off of the emulator, you can't get the nice console that would let you sort of, really inspect your data the way you can when it's really living in the cloud. So we'll just kind of have to take it on faith that that got set. Let's go ahead and move forward here. So we have our actual user ID, and we've shown how to talk to our database within our cloud function. Let's go ahead and actually do what our cloud function is supposed to do, which is read in this user document, so hopefully we can get out a list of favorite restaurants. So we got our favorites. Instead, what we're going to do is, instead of grabbing our collection of restaurants, we're going to say our user doc is, and we'll again do a await, firestore.doc, and here we know this is our users/user ID document.get. And then our user data will equal userdoc.data. And then we will console.log util.inspect user data. Not user data. Cool. I guess, yeah, maybe that's fine for now. Or you know what? Let's kind of make this all console log. Actually, we won't return here. What we'll do is in the response.send at the end here, we'll just say like, all done, check your logs. Right now, we're just going to kind of spit out most of our interesting data into our console. Let's see, we got a couple errors here. So first, this should be userdoc.data. That's a little better. Actually, that's looking pretty good. Let's run this and see what we get. So once again, npm run build. And then we've spit out our user ID here. Yours will obviously look different. I'm going to go ahead and call it now in our getFavorites function. We'll return. All done, check your logs. Let's see what we got in our logs. Is it going to work? Yeah, look at that. So it's saying we're going to get our favorites for this particular user document. And then it's found like our last login time and our favorites array, which has this list of 2 restaurants. We'll stop here, and the next one, we'll fetch this data and return it. So we're at a pretty good stopping point. I know, pretty exciting. Are you excited? I am. So yeah, this is a good point to stop. But stay tuned, because the next version, we'll go ahead, iterate through these, and actually grab our data from the database, and it'll be fantastic. So thank you very much for watching. I will see you very soon on another episode of Firebase Semi-live, where I will still be wearing the same shirt, because this is the only shirt I own. If you watch enough of these videos, I will afford to buy another shirt. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.